said that we would tie together all of these things and then draw some conclusions from them. What we have in each of these situations I have described for you is white men on the defensive, white men thinking and acting like women, white men so terrified of being criticized, so terrified of being called racists, that they will not protect themselves, their women, or their communities. They have let themselves be pushed into positions which are less and less defensible. Australia, for example, used to be a white country, in spirit as well as in fact. The government had a white Australia policy. Immigrants from non-white parts of the world simply were not accepted. That's the way the Australians wanted it, and the government was happy to oblige. In the late 1960s, however, the Jews, the controlled media, the Christian churches, and leftist elements in the Labour Party began collaborating on a long-range anti-racism propaganda campaign in Australia. It was the same sort of propaganda campaign that was used to soften up South Africa prior to turning it over to black rule. The formula was, racism is a terrible thing, and you should be ashamed if you have any racist feelings. Not permitting Asians and Middle Easterners to immigrate to Australia is racist. Or, in South, as social conditions in Australia began deteriorating and the crime rate began rising under the impact of Asian immigration, the government pushed for a general disarmament of the white population. Everyone would be safer, the government and the media and the churches proclaimed, if no one had a firearm. And the feminized, brainwashed population put up only a minimal protest. Yes, they wanted to feel safer. They wanted to be nicer. Let's get rid of those awful firearms. So in 1997, just 4 years ago, all privately owned firearms in Australia were confiscated by the government. Since then, there has been a 45% increase in the rate of armed robberies across Australia. In the state of Victoria, the rate of homicides committed with firearms has risen 300%. That's because the Asian gangs still have their guns, but the whites don't. It's really difficult to sympathize with white Australians and white South Africans. Through their own foolishness and weakness, they have brought their present problems upon themselves. When men began acting like women, that is what happens. When white men let themselves be bamboozled into feeling guilty and defensive about their natural, healthy racial feelings, that is what happens. I remember what happened in South Africa just a few years ago. The Christian churches there organized huge anti-apartheid demonstrations. The Jews were lurking in the background and pulling the strings, of course, but it was white Christians out front campaigning for an end to apartheid. It was Christian clerics denouncing racism from their pulpits and calling for interracial brotherhood. And the white lemmings soaked it up. I remember seeing the young white women, beautiful, empty-headed white women, marching in these demonstrations arm in arm with blacks. The white women were so proud of themselves for being ideologically fashionable, for being politically correct. And their men, their fathers, their husbands, their brothers, let them behave in this way rather than risk being thought racist themselves. And so now, the fashionable white women of South Africa are being raped and infected with the AIDS virus, and their spineless men are being forced to watch. Foolishness and weakness. Foolish women and weak men. But is that not the way most of our people are everywhere, including the United States? Isn't that the way most of our people always have been? Isn't that why the Jews just love mass democracy and praise democracy to the skies in their media. It's easy for us in the United States to shake our heads at the foolishness and weakness of the Australians and the South Africans. It's easy for us to say to the Australians, you had a Bill Clinton, Tony Blair-style government, a government catering to the welfare rabble and to the worst of the lemmings. So how can you be surprised that your government abandoned your white Australia policy and now welcomes a growing flood of non-white immigrants into your country? The Asian immigrants will be the new constituency for your politicians. And you certainly can't complain that now you have no weapons to protect yourselves and your women from these immigrants. You were so afraid of being politically incorrect that you permitted the government to confiscate your firearms without even putting up a fight.